Jason, as to the note, the jury note that we received right around lunchtime, that issue has been addressed. And I want the jury to, of course, continue to keep us apprised if these types of situations arise in the future, and they will be handled. Thank you. You may continue.
Thank you, Rob. Sergeant, I just have a few more questions for you.
Yes, sir.
In reference to the defendant's statement and his interview. First, let me apologize. I keep calling you Detective Brown instead of Sergeant Brown. Were you promoted after this case?
I was in 2018.
So, Sergeant, we heard Mr. Ahrens ask you or talk to you about a question that was asked of the defendant in which there was mention of Victoria screaming.
Yes.
Now, the information that you had from the neighbors, what was that in terms of the screams that were heard?
They said that they heard a loud screaming and like a loud female screaming.
Now, did you know at that time whether that was Michelle or Victoria?
No.
And again, in his version of what he said ultimately said to you in terms of seeing what Jessica did, he said cutting up the body. Is that right?
That's correct, sir. Very specific.
I would like to play one other clip for you. This is a fairly short one here.
Here's Victoria's body. I drew a silhouette for you. So, and you will do this all the time and show us, okay? Show me where Victoria was stabbed.
Oh, she was laying down, right? Okay. I was like, you know, and I see Jessica doing, like, I guess she was laying down, she was trying to fuck up Michelle too.
Okay.
At the same time. And Michelle was in there yelling, I know. And I was like, right there, like, by the door, stop, please just stop, you know?
Okay.
And she was like this stabbing at it, you know? Like,
Okay, so show me where the first stab was.
I don't know, it was like probably right in the middle or somewhere.
Okay, so make a mark where that first stab went to Jessica.
This is all crazy.
You know what? Let me tell you something.
But I'm telling you, like, the first stab was like, she walked up to her and she was like that. So maybe like right there, maybe.
Do it to the paper, just how she did it. Okay.
Stabbing at it like that. And she was just going bam, 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 like it's in the same kind of area.
So basically, according to your story, she should have multiple stab wounds, correct?
Well, she should have like a lot of things wrong.
You know, you tell me what she should have wrong.
She should
Because
have.
you know that. Listen, man. All right, she's gonna be examined tomorrow.
Okay. So we were talking earlier about references in the transcript and the reference to the middle. And we talked about the word stomach. Now, there are other instances of the word stomach.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, Mr. Ahrens read some of those questions about stomach in reference to the belief that there was a sexual assault. Now, before the defendant said middle, was there any reference to stomach in terms of the stabbing?
No, sir.
And when you watch this clip, was Detective Gontran, was she yelling at the defendant?
No, sir.
It seemed to me that she was trying to say, no, this is okay. Here's a piece of paper. We do this all the time. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Is that the kind of tone that she typically uses?
Yes, sir.
Would you describe her as calm?
I would. Yes, sir.
So I want to ask you, when you were at the scene and you spoke to the defendant, who first brought up Jessica's convictions?
He did. Fabian Gonzales did.
And that was after he talked about Jessica Kelly carrying Victoria downstairs, is that right?
Yes, sir.
When you have multiple, in your experience, when you have multiple suspects in a homicide investigation, is it common for one suspect to blame another suspect?
Yes, sir.
Is it common for one suspect who's maybe giving you details to minimize their role?
Yes, sir. That is completely, it's expected.
So you've been sitting here, you listened to the testimony of Jessica Kelly, you heard her say that the defendant did all of the cutting. And then, of course, you heard the defendant's interview in which he said Jessica Kelly did all of the cutting. In your opinion, would this be one of those instances where these defendants are minimizing their own role?
Yes, sir, that is true.
There are no further questions.
All right, thank you. Maybe so, Ms. Bixby?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may sit down.
Thank you.
Next witness?
Sorry.
That's okay.
State calls Jeffrey Smith. Your Honor, are we on 336? 337, I believe. Is that right? We're on 336.
Let's see, 336.
336.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Have a seat. I'm going to have my bailiff put a lapel microphone on you, and there's another one in front of you. You can use both microphones. And once it's situated, go ahead and state your name, please.
My name is Jeffrey Smith, Jeffrey, Smith.
Good afternoon, sir.
Afternoon.
Can you tell us where you work?
I work for the Department of Public Safety at the Forensic Lab in Santa Fe.
And what's your position there?
I am a Forensic Scientist 2. My area of expertise is latent print examination.
What's your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from California State University, Sacramento, and I've attended numerous training courses and conferences, educational conferences to include workshops throughout my 35-year career.
You said you're in the latent print examination unit of the Department of Public Safety. How long have you been doing latent print examination?
Over 35 years.
And did you receive specialized training to do this work?
I have. I received my initial training with the Sacramento Police Department, and I've had ongoing training throughout my career.
And in what areas have you been trained?
I've been trained in crime scene investigation, latent print processing, photography, latent print examination, which is the comparison component.
Digital photography?
I've been doing this for over 35 years. When I started, we still used film. But yes, now we use digital.
And what kind of professional certifications do you have?
I am certified by the International Association for Identification as a latent print examiner and a 10 print examiner.
Are you required to have continuing education in this role that you have as a latent print examiner?
To keep my certifications, I am. I have to renew every 5 years. There's a requirement for continuing education, as well as our laboratory is accredited by the International Organization for Standardization, which also requires continuing education.
And when were you last certified? Or I should say, when were you last, you said recertify every 5 years?
Yes.
Yeah, when were you last recertified?
Last year, I think, maybe the year before.
Okay. Are you a member of any professional societies?
I am a member of the International Association for Identification, the parent body, as well as the Rocky Mountain Division of the IAI, and I am a life member of the California Division of the IAI.
first start working for the Department of Public Safety?
In 2014.
Have you worked there continuously since then?
I have not. I left in October of 2019. I was accepted the position of the latent print supervisor for the Albuquerque Police Department, but due to commute, pandemic, everything else, it was not a good fit, and the Department of Public Safety graciously took me back.
Okay, well, let's talk about the Department of Public Safety and the standard operating procedures that the lab has in place to protect quality assurance.
Well, every unit has their own standard operating procedures. That is part of the quality system that we are required to have the ISO certification, which covers all of the sections in the lab, not just the latent print section.
Okay, and are those procedures, are those compulsory for the lab's accreditation?
Yes.
Okay, and who is the lab accredited by?
The American Association for Laboratory Accreditation, or they go by the acronym A2LA.
And are those standard operating procedures, are those also best practices in the profession?
Yes.
So you talked about the fact that you have a degree in criminal justice. Where did you first become familiar with friction ridge examination? And before I ask that question, is friction ridge examination, is that the same as latent print examination?
It is.
Okay. So when did you first become familiar with that field?
When I was in college, there was a class, I believe it was called Criminal Identification, which the vast component of it had to do with fingerprint comparison, recognition, learning the pattern types, and everything else. It's when I took that class that it's like the aha moment where it came easy to me. I understood what it meant. I actually got an A in the class, which was one of the few that I got. But it was then that I knew this is where I want to take my career and see if I could get a position doing that type of work.
Well, in your 35 years in this field, how many latent prints have you processed?
Tens of thousands, maybe more. I have no idea.
Okay. And how many latent prints have you compared?
The same.
How many times have you testified as an expert in the field of friction ridge examination or latent print examination?
Well, throughout my career, I lost count somewhere along the way. It's in excess of 100, but I have testified as an expert witness in California, Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, and I've had 2 of my sworn statements accepted in lieu of testimony in the Central Criminal Court of Iraq.
At this time, the state will offer Jeffrey Smith as an expert in latent print examination. No objection?
Will be permitted to testify in that capacity.
Thank you, Rob. So let's talk about latent prints and get a little bit of background first. How long has the science of latent print examination been practiced?
Over 100 years.
And what are the qualities of the skin, and particularly the friction ridge skin, that makes them valuable from a forensic point of view?
What is important about understanding friction ridge is everybody has it. It forms prior to birth and is permanent, persistent, and unique, and it remains the same on every individual throughout their life prior to birth and till after death and decomposition. Permanent scarring can occur, but your skin regenerates all the time. And even if you have a permanent scar, that scar is going to regenerate in the same position in which it initially happened. And the same thing happens with your friction ridge. While you go through many, many layers of skin in your lifetime, your friction ridge skin, which is found on your hands, palms, fingers, phalanges, or the joints, and on the bottom of your feet, it regenerates in the same manner, the same characteristics that it had from the day you were born.
Okay, so you talked about persistence and permanence. You also mentioned uniqueness. So does that mean that, for example, we heard testimony from a DNA expert, and they were talking about excluding people and statistics that were in numbers that are too large for me to say. But they also mentioned that DNA can be the same for identical twins. Is that true of latent prints as well?
Not all fingerprints have ever been compared to everybody in the world, past or current. But there have been studies with identical twins, and while identical twins share the same DNA, their fingerprints are different.
Okay. Now, in all of those studies of fingerprints, have two people been found to have the same prints?
Never.
What are exemplars?
Exemplars are known standards that are intentionally taken from an individual. I'm going to speculate that the majority of people in this courtroom have been fingerprinted at one point in time in their life. People get printed all the time for a variety of different reasons. Those are exemplars. We know where they originate, we know the source, and they are intentionally taken.
And what are the ways you can take an exemplar?
It still happens, but not so much anymore. Ink is the most common, but now with the advent of technology, what we call live scan are basically large computer systems that, to simplify, is a very large scanner that we take fingerprints and then we print them out.
And what about major case prints? What are those?
Major case prints are the intentional collection of all the ridge detail on your fingers, your phalanges or your joints, and your palms. When taking major case prints, we want to record every bit of ridge detail that's on your hands. Now you can include feet in there, but we don't take foot exemplars very often.
Okay. So let's talk about the process of developing latent prints. How is a print deposited on a surface?
When we're talking latent prints, we're talking a chance impression. When you handle an item, there's a chance you're going to leave your prints on it. And that is a transfer of the oils and residues on your hands onto that item. I teach in latent print development currently in the police academy. One of the first things I do when I'm teaching in the academy or teaching latent print development is I will take something like this bottle, more often like a soda can because it's smoother, it doesn't have all the bumps and ridges. And I will hold it up in front of my class and I will say, okay, I'm holding this item. You see me holding this item. So my prints are going to be on that item, right? And everybody always agrees, yes, my prints are going to be on that item. The next thing we do is we process that. Sometimes we'll develop my prints. Sometimes we won't develop my prints. And it has to do with a lot of factors. The cleanliness of the item, the smoothness of the item, how dry your skin is. We live in New Mexico, it's really dry. So just because you touch or handle an item doesn't necessarily mean you're going to leave a print on it for me to develop down the road. Many times when I'm processing items to try and visualize or develop latent prints, I will not develop any usable prints. We'll get bits and pieces because when you touch an item, like I say, it's a chance impression. You'll leave partials that are not usable, but I will develop prints that I can use to determine source.
So let's take that example, okay, of you grabbing that water bottle. Let's say you did that yesterday, and then you did it again today. And when you process it, you get one print. Are you able to tell which day that print was left?
No.
And if you touched it as you grabbed it, where you had all 5 fingers and the joints in your hands and your palm, and you only find one fingerprint, why would that be?
All the reasons I stated. I may leave a print. I may have more sweat on my, say, my index finger as opposed to my other fingers. I may have residue on it. There may be residue on the bottle that will collect it or let me deposit print on it that I can then develop. Sometimes I touched it repeatedly and I touched it in the same spot. So now I have ridge detail I've left on the bottle that's on top of other ridge detail. Well, that, for the most part, spoils what I'm trying to do, because when we have stuff stacked or overlaid, most of the time it is not usable for comparison.
And so if you find one fingerprint on there, it doesn't mean you picked it up with one finger, right? Common sense would tell us that you picked it up with more than one finger.
Yes.
Oh, you talked about this a little bit. What are the types of surfaces that a print can be deposited on?
There are basically 2 types of surfaces. There's porous, or something that's going to absorb, and non-porous, something that's not going to absorb. So when I refer to porous, think of paper. Paper is a good porous surface. Non-porous, my water bottle, my soda can, a piece of glass, something hard, smooth, those types of things.
And does the different type of surface affect how you develop the print?
It does.
Okay, in what way?
For porous items, we typically use a chemical called ninhydrin. Ninhydrin reacts with the amino acids that your body secretes, and it turns a purplish color. Because when you handle an item, a porous item, say this piece of paper, you leave the print and it gets absorbed into the paper. So that print, paper is really good because it's absorbed, hard to wipe off, it's in the paper. So they will develop kind of like a negative would, but it's a purplish color. And we apply heat and humidity. We have a special oven that we put them in and we cook them to develop those prints. And that's for porous items. For non-porous items, our typical process, and let me back up just a second. Every examination I conduct, the first examination I do is a visual examination, because even though we refer to them as latent prints, there are many times where if I just manipulate the lighting, the prints are visible to me. It's still a latent print, but it's a visible print because it's on the item. So then if I see something, I will document it photographically, because that's how we document and collect our latent prints. So back to non-porous items, after a visual examination, we put it in an airtight chamber and we heat superglue. The superglue fumes float around in the chamber and they will adhere to the residue on that item and develop the prints. We develop any prints that are usable, we photograph. Sometimes we photograph when they're not usable, and that's how we know they're not usable. If we're unsure, we take a photograph. Every step along the way, if we develop any prints, we photograph. Following superglue fuming, we use a dye stain. Our predominant dye stain that we use is called a rhodamin 6G. And then we view it with an alternate light source, meaning we can change the wavelength of the light. And when we do that, the rhodamin fluoresces and helps us visualize and see the prints. Sometimes it will enhance prints that we've already developed that were previously not sufficient, or it will develop prints that we couldn't see with the naked eye, and then we will document them as well photographically.
So I think we're all familiar with crime shows where we see dusting for prints, right? Where the officers are on the scene and they put powder down and then they brush the powder and then they're looking for a print that's left behind. Is that a process you use in the lab?
Rarely. Dusting is primarily for field work. We have a lab with controlled environment and chemicals that we can process with. It's much more efficient, we get better results. But it's not practical for field work because you can't bring the car in to our lab to process it. So we can't bring the windows in on the burglary to process it. So while dusting is a very good technique, and I've used it a bunch of times throughout my career, it is not something that we employ on a regular basis. And typically that is black powder out in the field. That's what most people are familiar with. I will on occasion use fluorescent powder on items and then view them with the ALS to see if the print will fluoresce. And then if you do lift in the field, they typically put tape over it, lift it, attach it to a card, and then submit it.
So you talked about the CA fuming or super glue fuming method, and you're saying, is that a more accurate or at least more sensitive method for developing a print than dusting with powder?
I would say yes, just because it's a controlled environment. You can develop prints with super glue, cyanoacrylate, that you may not develop with powder out in the field.
Okay. Now, tell us about the laboratory procedures for handling evidence. What do you do in the lab to make sure that there's no contamination or to make sure that you're not smearing a print that's been left behind?
Well, our procedures are, we accept evidence items from every agency throughout the state of New Mexico. So they come into the lab in a variety of different ways. Most times they're hand delivered, but sometimes they're delivered via UPS, FedEx, certified mail, depending on what the item is. When we receive it, our evidence custodians enter it in the system and barcode it. Then they scan it for chain of custody and they put it in one of our mini storage vaults. When the case is assigned to me, I request it from the evidence section. They go to the vault, they scan it, bring it out, scan it to me. I put in my unique password so that the transfer of the chain of custody goes from the evidence section to me. When I process items, if it is for another section, typically latent print examination is first, DNA analysis is second, and then depending, firearms or chemistry for drugs. So if I have an item that comes in that has subsequent processes requested, specifically DNA, I wear, I don't know if this is the correct term, but I refer to it as a clean room suit. It is a Tyvek jumpsuit. First I put on a mask, then I put on my Tyvek hood, then I put on my Tyvek suit, and of course we always wear gloves. That is the procedure that I use to try and prevent any kind of contamination.
And do you use examination paper? Do you lay examination paper down?
We put paper down for each individual item if it's a DNA item. So for example, my water bottle, I will put examination paper down to do my photography, to look at it. Then I will take that examination paper, discard it, and new paper for the next item. New gloves. I still wear the same suit because that thing doesn't come on and off for each item. The suit is to prevent me from shedding my DNA onto those particular items.
So you touched on this a little bit, but let's talk about chain of custody for the lab. So what's the lab's procedure for chain of custody?
Well, like I said a little bit, it comes to us. We document it, make sure the packaging is sealed. If it's not sealed, we have them do remediation to make sure it is sealed. The only time we break a seal before any kind of processing is if it's a firearm, because the firearms guys have to come out and verify that the weapon is safe. So the evidence section will take it in, they will document it, verify the paperwork they're submitting with what they have. They will enter it into our LIMS system, Laboratory Information Management System, and assign it a barcode. Scan the barcode, it's now in our custody, goes to a vault. Scan the barcode, shows that it went from the evidence custodian's custody into the vault, sits in the vault for however long till it's requested. Scanned again, comes out, scanned to the analysis or the analyst who is working on the case. And then, particularly since we're talking about me, into my custody. When it's in my custody, I have a locker where I have the key to the lock on the locker. Stays in my locker unless I am working on it, actively working on it. Locker stays locked when I'm not there, when I go home, come back the next day, unlock the locker, continue working if it's a multi-day processing.
Do you have multiple items out at a time?
Depending on the case.
Now, are you required to document if the packaging is either not sealed or damaged in some way?
I am, and I do. That's part of my case notes, as well as I photograph the packaging of the item to show that it was sealed when I got it. That is also part of my case notes. And then when I open it, I photograph the item to show that it is what it is supposed to be, and that's part of my case notes.
And is each item barcoded?
Yes and no. Yes, each package is barcoded, but sometimes we will receive an item, say item number 1, that contains more than one item. They call it number 1, but if there's more than one thing in there, we will sub-item it, say 1A, 1B, 1C, but it's still, per the submission, one item, so it only gets one barcode. So to answer your question, not every item is barcoded, but every item we receive that is documented that way is barcoded.
Okay. And how is that tracked in terms of a chain of custody log?
In our LIMS system, like I said, with the barcode transfers. But if we're sub-iteming, say I open an item 1, and it has 5 things in it, that's just in my case notes where I will sub-item it. I do not sub-item it and then request additional barcodes for each sub-item.
Okay. So a few minutes ago, you said your first step is a visual examination.
That's correct.
What do you do after a visual examination?
It depends on what the item is. If it's a porous item, typically ninhydrin, non-porous item, it goes in the superglue fuming chamber.
Okay. And then what's the next step?
Porous item, once it dries, because ninhydrin's applied, it's a liquid. So we apply the liquid to the piece of paper. We can either spray it, depending on how much paper, I will use a paintbrush, let it dry. It goes in the ninhydrin oven. That helps facilitate development with the heat and the humidity. It comes out, I will do a visual examination. If I see any developed latent prints, I will scan them. When we have sheets of paper, we use the scanner to document. We don't photograph, just more convenient, time saving. We can still scan at a very high quality to get really good digital images. And then I will mark the item, seal it back up, put it in my locker, give it back to evidence when I'm done. A non-porous item, once it's fumed in the superglue chamber, if I develop any prints, I will photograph them. Then I will apply the dye stain and view it with an ALS. Any enhanced prints, any additional prints, marked and photographed. Item is marked, back in the packaging, back in my locker, back to evidence when I'm done.
Thank you. Do you follow a protocol called ACE-V?
ACE-V is a protocol, it's a methodology we use for comparison.
And so what are the steps? Can you walk
ACE-V is an acronym that stands for analysis, comparison, evaluation, and verification. During the analysis phase, we look at the ridge flow to determine, hopefully, what it is. There are 3 basic pattern types in fingerprints. There's a loop. That's where the ridges come in one side, loop around, come back out the other side. There is an arch, which ridges come in from one side, kind of flow over, go out the other side. And there's a whorl. A whorl, W-H-O-R-L, not swirl, is kind of like a bullseye pattern. It looks kind of like a target. If you think of Target the store where they've got the little bullseye, that's what a whorl looks like. So during analysis, we're looking for that ridge flow to see if we can determine pattern type. To see if we think that print is going to be sufficient for use in comparison. And when we're doing analysis, we're looking for level 1 detail, which is the ridge flow, level 2 detail, which are the individual characteristics that are contained within ridge detail, either the pattern type or your palms. Palms sometimes have patterns, sometimes they don't. And there's 3 basic characteristics there. There's an ending ridge goes up, stops. There's a bifurcation, a ridge flows and then splits into 2, and there's a dot. We're looking to see if those ridge characteristics are contained within the ridge detail during the analysis phase. The second is comparison. That's when we're looking at, after we've decided during our analysis phase that I like this ridge detail, I'm going to keep it, I think I can compare it. I can either determine source, make an identification, or I can use it for inclusion or exclusion. And when I say that, that print is not identifiable. I cannot determine source. But that print is a loop. But there's not enough level 2 information in there for me to determine source. But because I know it's a loop, if I'm comparing someone who has no loops, I can exclude them as being the source of that print because there's no possible way they could have made it. So during comparison, I am looking at my latent, my unknown, because I don't know who it belongs to, and my knowns to determine whether or not I can exclude or maybe make an identification. And then I'm going back and forth and I'm looking at the ridge flow to see if it corresponds. I'm looking at the level 2 characteristics and see if there is correspondence in the latent and in the known. And when I say correspondence, for example, I mentioned an ending ridge. I have an ending ridge. I have 2 intervening ridge, and then I have a bifurcation that's facing the left. I'm looking for the repetition of that in the latent print and the correspondence in the latent print to the known print. If I find that correspondence, I move on to the evaluation phase, and that's when I make my conclusion. Is this a source determination or is this an exclusion?
Okay, well, let me stop you there. So what types of conclusions can you draw?
I can draw source determination or an identification. I can exclude, or it's inconclusive. And typically inconclusive means I can't exclude, I can't exclude, so it is included. For example, in my example of the loop's not identifiable, but the person I'm comparing has loops. I can't exclude them, but I can't determine source because it's not identifiable.
And then you mentioned the last step is verification.
Every comparison conclusion that we do is verified by a second examiner. If I come to the determination that that's a source determination or an identification, That is verified by a second examiner. If I come to the conclusion that that individual is excluded as the source, that is verified. If I come to the conclusion that I can't come to a conclusion, it's inconclusive, that is also verified. And every single conclusion that we report out is verified by a second qualified examiner.
Okay, so let's talk about, thank you for the background. Let's talk about this case. Were you assigned, or did you do latent friend examination in the investigation of Victoria Martens' homicide?
I was assigned, and yes, I did.
Okay. How many items did you process?
I believe 89. I wrote it down. Can I look?
You can look, yes.
86.
86.
And that is items processed. I had other items, but some of those items were known exemplars, so I didn't count those.
Okay. And you told us about the chain of custody and the sealing and documenting any damage, all of that type of thing. You told us about I believe it's the LIMS system, is that right?
Yes.
Were all of those procedures followed in this case with respect to all 86 of those items?
They were.
And we've talked about the CA fuming and the fluorescent dye. Did you say is that rhodamine dye?
Rhodamine dye.
Okay. So let's talk about the process in this case. Did you told us about the ACE-V protocol. Did you apply that protocol to the items in this case?
That's comparison. So I processed to develop the prints first.
Okay. So you processed and developed the prints and then applied the comparison protocol.
I did.
Well, let's talk about the individual items that you tested. There are a few items in particular I want to highlight. Let's talk about item 2674, which is the wipes container.
Okay.
Did you process that item and then determine whether a comparison could be made?
I did. Hold on. Yes, it was a striped Huggies container that had a reddish-brown stains. That's how I described it in my notes and in my report.
And were you able to develop any latent prints from that item?
I was not. Well, can I check my notes real quick?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I developed ridge detail, but the ridge detail I developed was not sufficient for use in comparison.
So let's move to item 1842, which is the laundry basket. Did you develop any prints from that item?
I developed ridge detail. I developed one print that was sufficient for inclusion, exclusion only.
And where was that print located on that laundry basket?
I would have to see the laundry basket because I can't remember. But when we develop a print, we document a print, we mark the item so that when this situation comes up, there's a chance that I can look at it and tell you where it was.
Okay. If I show you a photograph of just the laundry basket without your marking, would you be able to tell us, or do you need the marking?
I would need the marking, particularly in this case because to my recollection, that laundry basket is white.
Would it refresh your recollection?
No, it's orange.
It's orange. Yes. Okay, so you developed one print, you said?
One print that was sufficient for use in comparison, but it was not sufficient to determine source or make an identification.
Okay, so it was that exclusion, inclusion analysis that you were talking about earlier?
That is correct.
Okay. So were you able to include or exclude chair, let's talk about the standards that you have in this case. What standards did you have?
Initially or altogether?
Altogether.
Altogether, I had major case prints from Fabian Gonzales, Michelle Martens, Jessica Kelly. I do not know. I had inked finger, palm, and footprint standards from Victoria Martens. I don't know if they met the degree of quality to fall under a major case, but when we receive prints on a deceased individual, many times they are not a complete set. Many times they're not even including palms. I also had major case prints from Armando Gomez. And there's one other individual that I had prints on by the name of Matthew Oding. And I also described those as major case prints.
And you talked about major case prints for Fabian Gonzales, Jessica Kelly, and Michelle Martens. And were you involved in obtaining those major case prints?
I was the one who obtained those major case prints.
Okay. And did you use the ink and roller method?
I did use ink.
So let's go back and talk about 1842. Were you able to make an inclusion or exclusion with respect to the standards in this case?
I was able to eliminate Gonzales, but I could not eliminate Kelly or Michelle Martens or Victoria Martens, and it had to do with the quality of the print. The print wasn't good enough for me to make that determination. So I don't remember off the top of my head because this was 5 years ago. That print is a right slant loop. So when I said there's 3 pattern types, there's loops, arches, and whorls. There's 2 types of loop. There's a right slant and there's a left slant. This particular print I knew was a right slant loop, but those 3 individuals that I cannot exclude, they all have right slant loops. So I can't make that determination.
Your Honor, may I first witness?
You may.
Mr. Smith, I've handed you what's been marked for identification as states exhibits 336 through 352. If you could review those items and tell us what's contained in those exhibits.
Photographs that it appears that I took. They were part of my case notes, particularly 336. 337 is an enlargement of, I'd have to look.
And I believe if you use 336 as a reference, would that help?
Maybe. Yes. So 337 is enlargement of the latent impression on item 1849, one of the impressions. It looks like 338 is an enlargement of the second impression that's on item 1849. 339 is the third impression that's on item 1849. 340 is my visual example of showing correspondence of an identification for latent impression 1849-3. Which is the latent impression contained on People's 339. People's 341 is an enlargement of the fourth impression from item 1849. People's 342 is the visual example of the identification of latent 1849-4. 1849, or I'm sorry, People's 343 appears to be an enlargement of one of the impressions on item 2680. People's 344 is the visual representation of the identification of the latent 2681, which was People's 343. People's 345 appears to be an enlargement of latent print 2680-2. People's 346 is the visual representation of the identification of latent 2682. People's 347 is an enlargement of latent 2680-3. People's 348 is the visual representation showing correspondence for the identification of latent 2680-3. People's 349 appears to be an enlargement of latent 2680-4. People's 350 is the visual example representation of correspondence for the identification of latent 2680-4. People's 351 is a photograph of a knife, which I believe was my item .
Would that be 1834A?
I don't know. It looks, per my description, yes, but let me look at these pictures because that was a different report. There's different processing and different note packet. Yes. And People's 352 is my item 1834B through 1834M. It was a knife block containing multiple knives.
Statement will move, excuse me, Mr. Smith, do the photographs that are depicted there, are those photographs you took?
Yes.
And the visual representations that are there, are those representations that you created?
Yes.
Do they fairly and accurately represent the items that you developed and latent prints that you developed?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state will move for admission of states 336 through 352. Without objection.
336 through 352 will be admitted and will be published.
Thank you, Your Honor. So starting at the end there, you mentioned a knife block. Let's talk about that briefly and then go back. So the knife block, did you receive that as one item?
I did. It was submitted as item 1834. And then as I stated earlier, when I have one item that contains multiple items, I will sub-item. So on that one, I sub-itemed A through M.
And do you see in the middle of that photograph, there are three knives and a middle knife there. Do you know what item that is?
No.
Okay. That's one, that's
I would
one of
have to
the
see
items.
the item.
That's one of the items of B through M, is that what you're saying?
Yes,
And did you label each of those knives with the letter that you assigned it?
I did.
So let's go back and approach the witness.
You may.
And just for reference, is the photograph there, is that 352? And does that show the knife block with the knives?
Yes.
So we were talking about the laundry basket. Is this 336? Does that contain photographs of many of the prints that you were able to develop in this case?
Yes.
Is there a second page to that?
Yes.
There. So let's talk about, we were talking about the laundry basket, and you mentioned and you'll have to repeat that for me, it was something to do with a loop, is that right?
It is a right slant loop.
And is that this photograph here?
It is that one, it's the one, that one, and then one, yes.
Okay, those three photographs. Okay. So let's move on and talk about the next item. Let's talk about 1849, which is the plastic bag.
Yes, I described it as one white plastic bag. I believe it was like a trash bag.
In the description of that item, does it say where it was located? Where it was located at the scene?
Where it was collected? I don't know.
On 1849, were you able to develop latent prints?
I was. I developed 5 latent prints, 3 sufficient for identification, 2 only for inclusion-exclusion purposes.
And did you compare those prints to the standards you had in this case?
I did.
What was your comparison and your conclusion?
I was able to identify the 3 identifiable prints to Jessica Kelly and eliminate Gonzales, Michelle Martens, and Victoria Martens from one of the prints, and eliminate the palms of Kelly, Gonzales, and Victoria Martens from the other. I believe that was my initial comparison. I believe I subsequently identified the print to Jessica Kelly after the collection of major case prints.
Okay, well, let's talk about that a little bit. So did you initially receive major case prints that you had not done yourself?
I did not.
You did not receive major case prints that you...
I don't believe they were
Okay.
major case
Did you
prints.
receive standards? That you
I did.
Okay. And did you, because of this comparison that you just told us about, in which there was not sufficient detail, did you then Is that why you then collected the major case prints from Jessica Kelly, Fabian Gonzales, and Michelle Martens in this case?
Yes.
So you kind of knew what to look for, is that basically?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So one of these, let's take a look at here, 1849 and it has this circular red pen mark. Is that your mark?
That is my mark.
Does that correspond to that mark?
Yes. The half moon, I guess, but the mark,
So can you tell us about 339? What are we seeing here?
it is a latent print I developed on the plastic bag. The mark, for most times, indicates orientation. So that particular print, from how I'm looking at it, you need to rotate counterclockwise.
Counterclockwise?
Yes. And probably 30 degrees more counterclockwise. That would be the orientation. And when I say orientation, we're talking finger up. Or if it's a palm, palm up.
So you're talking about this right in here?
Yes.
Now tell us about, and let's orient it the same way. 340. What is this a representation of?
That is a representation of my identification, although it is poorly reproduced. And I think that just has to do with
I think it has
your device.
It's a little washed out and it has the little yellow dots here.
Yes. My yellow dots are not projecting well on the right thumb or the right side of that. And they're, at least to me, they're looking white on the left-hand side, which is the latent print. So that's the unknown.
Okay. So are the yellow dots, do they correspond to each other across?
They do. They show correspondence. When I think I talked a little bit about it, what we're looking for is correspondence. I'm looking for the ending ridge in the same spot in the latent print and on the known print. And the spatial relationship of those individual characteristics on the latent print and the known print. For example, boy, hard to see.
Yeah, so we have a yellow dot here, a yellow dot here, here. Where would you like me to point?
Well, I think they show up, well, those are good, but also on the left-hand side towards the edge, I can see 4 really distinct on the latent print.
Would that be here?
Nope,
No.
latent print. Keep going left.
Over
Yes.
here?
Those 4 distinct. You can see, I see 2, 1, 2, 3 of them. No, I can see the 4th now on the known print. So, for example, this is hard for me to do because I can't point it out, but the bottommost dot on the latent, the image on the left-hand side, that one right there, if I can't see.
I can bring you a copy to you.
I have a copy. Okay, so the bottommost dot on the latent print on the left-hand side corresponds with the bottommost dot on the known print. It's the ending ridge. No, because you can't see that one. That one. Wait, move your finger down. Nope, that's the one.
Do you have to with this step down?
Yes, you're right.
That'd probably be easier.
Thank
It
you,
would be
you're
much easier.
right. Thank you, you're right.
I forgot. This, paper clips look good for this. Hope you don't want it back. This dot right here corresponds with this dot right here. It's probably difficult to see, but right here is an intervening ridge, and then one ridge over, we have this correspondence. From this dot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, follow it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, follow it up, and you have that correspondence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that correspondence. Throughout the print, that's what I'm looking for. The correspondence of those characteristics within the print, I would not expect to see in anybody else's print that I've ever compared. That's what makes latent prints, ridge detail, unique to an individual. It is that spatial relationship from one to the other, always repeats, always regrows, always comes back, except for permanent scar.
Thank you. I think that will be sufficient. So on 1849, which is the plastic bag, you analyzed, you said you had 5 different prints, 3 of which were suitable for identification, and it became 4 later, is that right?
No.
Okay, so the 4 prints suitable for identification, so we're talking about,
3.
are we talking about 1849-1, 1849-2, 1849-3, and 1849-4?
Correct.
Now, can you tell us what parts of Jessica Kelly's hands you were able to identify on those 4 different prints?
1849-3 was identified as the right thumb. 1849-4 was identified as the left palm. And 1849-2 was subsequently identified after I obtained the major case prints as the right middle finger of Kelly.
So middle finger, thumb, and palm?
Yes.
Let's move on to 2680, Lamont. Actually, before we get there, we have a few other things to talk about. So, you produced a number of different reports in this case, is that right?
I believe 6.
6 reports. And at some point, you analyzed or examined for latent prints, and then whether there were suitable comparisons, a number of different DVDs, is that right?
DVDs, CVDs, yes.
Okay. Well, let's talk about those. So, how many discs did you analyze? Or process, I should say.
57.
Okay. go to number 30.
Okay. I developed one impression, and for clarity, 30 is a Memorex DVD plus or minus R with handwritten "Throw Mama from the Train."
And can you tell us what you found on 30?
I developed one print that was sufficient for identification.
And did that print, were you able to identify it?
I was able to identify it to Kelly.
Let's go to 35.
Three latents. Do you want to know what type of DVD it was? How it was
Yeah,
marked?
that'd be helpful, sure.
35 was a DVD marked Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I developed three impressions suitable for identification and subsequently identified one of them to Michelle Martens, one of them to Oting, I don't remember his first name, and one to Jessica Kelly.
Okay, let's move to number 37.
I developed three impressions, all suitable for identification. Two identified to Mr. Oting. I'm going to look up his name because now it's going to bother me. Matthew. Oh, that's embarrassing. That's my son's name. So I should remember that. Which one are we talking about? 37?
35? All right,
30.
excuse me, 37.
37. Two identified to Matthew Oting, one to Jessica Kelly.
And number 40?
Number 40 was marked, it's a DVD marked Deep Blue Sea. 7 identifiable latent prints I developed. 3 identified to Matthew Oting. 2 identified to Michelle Martens. 1 identified to Jessica Kelly.
Let's go to 51.
2 latents developed, 1 for identification, 1 for inclusion, exclusion only. And the identifiable print was identified to Fabian Gonzales.
Number 56.
2 impressions sufficient for identification. 1 identified to Matthew Oting, 1 identified to Fabian Gonzales.
And we talked about the knives. Did you try to develop any prints off of the knives?
I did. I processed these items in an attempt to develop prints. I did not, to my recollection, develop any usable prints on, no, that's not true. I think I did on one of them.
Would that be 1834C?
I did not develop any on 1834A or 1834B. One sufficient for identification on 1834C, which was subsequently identified to Michelle Martens.
And you mentioned here 1834A. You were not able to develop any usable prints?
I developed no ridge detail at all.
Okay, so let's go back to 2680, which is the mop. See on this page a number of photographs here and visual representations. 2681 versus dash 1, dash 2. points off of the model.
I was. I developed 4 prints sufficient for identification.
And we have here a photograph 2681. Again, there's a red marking on the photograph. Does that correspond to that photograph?
Yes.
First, and then this one. Okay.
343, which you're showing now, that is the original image, digital image taken of the print developed with Rodeman 6G and fluorescing using the alternate light source. So that's how it looks when you're looking at it under the light source. And you're wearing orange goggles. I need to use an orange filter on my camera to take the picture. The one underneath, when I do this, I process the image in Photoshop and I turn it black and white. Because when we get known standards, be them inked or live scan, the ridges are black, the furrows are white. They're black and white. So I want my latent image to look like my known standards. It's easier on my eyes when I'm doing comparisons.
So if we look at 344, would this be more of the color that you're talking about?
Yes, the latent on the left, 2680-1, that is the same image that you just saw in the orange picture, but it's just turned to black and white. And then the known standard of the left index of Gonzales is on the right-hand side. This one you can see my dots to show correspondence better.
And you can also see, is that red lines on here?
That's my marking of my latent to show in the visual representation of me counting ridges from, can I go up there again?
After he demonstrates this exhibit, we'll take a 10-minute break.
So from this dot and its corresponding dot, my red ridge tracing is showing you the ridges that I am following to get up to here to get to this dot. That's what that's me ridge tracing, and that's how we do comparisons. I'm looking at the corresponding ridges to get to my minutia, my ridge characteristics. So I do that for me and for anyone else who is looking at it subsequently so that they can follow how I got from that one characteristic over to the other characteristics.
Thank you, Mr.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break. All rise to the jury.
my head, I don't.
Smith, when we left off, we were talking about 2680, the MOP. And you were walking us through the comparison on 2680-1. Did you apply that same comparison process to 2680-2, 2680-3, and 2680-4?
I did.
Okay. Can you tell us what parts of Fabian Gonzales' hands were found on 2680-1 through -4?
2680-1 was identified as the left index finger. 2682 was also identified as the left index finger. 2683 was identified as the right middle finger. And 2684 was identified as the left thumb.
Thank you. May I push the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Mr. Smith, can you tell me what I just handed you?
This is the initial evidence receipt that is submitted by the agency to Department of Public Safety Forensic Lab.
Do you recognize that document?
I do.
And is that document the evidence receipt for the homicide investigation for Victoria Martens homicide?
It is.
Can you turn to page 4 for me, please? Do you see a description there for item 1842, which we've discussed as the laundry basket?
Yes.
Can you tell me what that description is there?
Plastic laundry basket from living room collected by Detective Pisano.
And what about 1849, which we've discussed as the plastic bag?
Plastic bag from floor in northeast bedroom collected by Detective Pisano.
That was northeast bedroom?
Northeast bedroom. NE.
And 2680, I believe, maybe on the next page. And that's the mop.
Yes.
Can you read that description, please?
Mop from rear balcony of apartment 808 collected by Detective Lascar.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Now, during our brief recess here, did you have a chance to examine the laundry basket in the presence of the parties?
I did.
Your Honor, may he come down from the witness stand?
You may.
Mr. Smith, if you could bring some clothes with you. Could you please show the jury where on the laundry basket you were able to find the print that was only suitable for inclusion or exclusion?
It is on the inside of the laundry basket, right here where I have marked it. The way I have marked it, as I explained earlier, indicates orientation. So while I don't know what it is, I believe the orientation is like how my thumb is on the inside of the laundry basket.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, when you're screening an item that's submitted to you for latent print processing, do you look at the item to see how it might be held or where prints might be most likely to be found?
It plays into my examination, yes.
Okay. So for an item like the laundry basket, would you be looking particularly at the handles?
Well, not necessarily. I'm looking at the whole thing. I'm processing the whole thing. Because while I may, as part of my thought process, say I would probably handle it like this, I cannot rely on that because people handle things differently. So, You know, I indicated orientation on that. To me, it's oriented like this, but somebody else could be handling that basket in whole different ways that I don't even think about. I think of how I would do it, but that doesn't mean that's how everybody would do it.
Okay. And how many latent prints were you able to find on that entire basket?
One that was sufficient. There was ridge detail in other spots. There is a marking on the inside of that laundry basket that I put there because I took a picture, but that picture was insufficient, so I did assign it a latent number.
So did you find any latent prints that were suitable for comparison on those handles?
No, just the one that I had indicated earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Your Honor, pass the witness.
Thank you.
Just a few questions, Mr. Smith. Do you have the exhibits there here? So the knives, which I don't seem to see here, but Fabian Gonzales was not identified on any of the knives. I think there was a block of knives as well. Is that correct? He was not identified? There you go. Thank you.
That is correct.
I think he subdivided them into all of their, this is 354 that I'm putting up here. So you looked at every one of these knives?
I did, and the block.
And the block itself? And he was not identified any of those, correct?
That is correct.
Now, I was trying to keep track. It looks like he was identified or couldn't be eliminated on 3 objects in this case. One was a mop in the rear balcony. I think that's called 2680.
Correct.
Now, I think you said a number of different fingers, but was it all from the same hand, like somebody who had grabbed a mop?
No, I believe I said he was identified. His left index finger was identified twice, his right middle finger, and his left thumb.
Okay, so it sounds like both hands got onto that mop at some point.
That's correct.
Right. And the only other 2 are 2 CDs or DVDs, 55 and 56, I think.
56 and 51.
51. And some of the other CDs had Matthew's, Michelle's, I think Jessica as well. You found prints on some of the other CDs as well.
Numerous prints.
And these were mainly children's movies like Robin Hood, something like that?
Well, I'm not so sure.
Adults like Robin Hood, don't they?
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves is really a kid's movie. One of them was the 2 Men in Black movies. Those could be kids' movies. I mean,
So they were movies, though, basically.
movies. One was Throw Mama from the Train. I don't know if I'd call that a kid's movie.
Okay. Do you know if the mop in the rear balcony or those movies, you don't know if they have anything to do with this case, do you?
I do not.
Now, there was this clothes basket, and there was also a white plastic bag. Was the plastic bag inside the clothes basket?
There was a plastic bag inside the clothes basket, but that is not the one that I developed prints and identified the prints on.
Okay, so we're talking 2 white plastic bags then.
Yes,
All right, so the orange plastic basket, Mr. Gonzalez was eliminated from that object, is that correct?
that is correct.
You could not, however, eliminate Jessica Kelly as someone who left that latent print that you showed to the jury a couple of minutes ago.
I could not.
Now, the plastic bag, 1849, had 5 latents. Is that right?
Yes, 3 identifiable, 2 inclusion, exclusion only.
Okay. And Gonzalez was eliminated from, he wasn't, he was eliminated on one of the 3. Is that right?
He was eliminated on
Dash 1.
1. Give
He
me a
was
second.
eliminated on dash 2, or 2, huh?
Initially, he could not, I eliminated his palms, but I needed fully rolled joints, and I believe that one was subsequently identified to Kelly.
Okay. And once you identify it to Ms. Kelly, then that's pretty much to the exclusion of anybody else.
Yeah, we can't say that because not everybody has been compared, but once I identify a print, I would not expect, to me, it doesn't belong to anybody else.
Okay. Now, were you asked to lift prints of a clothes iron?
I was not.
And were you asked to lift prints from pink pajama bottoms?
Well, I don't believe I was, but that's not an item that we would process for latents because it's just not conducive. Clothing, my shirt, my t-shirt. Clothing is not typically an item that we would process for latent prints because it's so porous, loose weave, we're not going to develop any. Now, having said that, I know of cases where they have, so it's not impossible.
That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor. So, Mr. Smith, I believe the way Mr. Ahrens phrased it was that Fabian Gonzales was eliminated from the basket. Would it be more accurate to say that Fabian Gonzales was eliminated from the one print that was suitable for comparison from the basket?
That is correct.
And he also said that you were not able to eliminate Jessica Kelly from that print. Were you also not able to eliminate Michelle Martens, Matthew Oding, and Armando Gomez?
I was not. The only one who was excluded was Gonzales.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Your Honor, no further questions.
All right, may this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may step down. Thank you. Forget your microphone. And then have the parties approach, please. Today for testimony. So I'm going to have the live stream turned off and also the Zoom, please.